Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin, and today we're going to be talking about the ever-increasing interest in modular construction. And to help me with this and give us his expert's view into that subject is Finbarr Doyle, CEO of P4HB. And for those that don't know, that means Procurement for House Builders. So Finbarr, welcome.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good, nice to see you. Look, Finbarr, let's start off at the very beginning. Modular construction methods. Tell us all about it.
Okay.
Tell us what it means.
Well, modular construction is about prefabricating elements or full modular houses off-site, essentially in a factory, and then bringing them to site to install those component parts, or indeed the full house or full unit on site. The idea is that all of the problems are solved pre-construction back at the factory.
You hope.
You hope. And then they bring this lovely package to site, assemble it on site. It's a really great concept, and it has huge legs in terms of what it could bring to bear in terms of being that the government has announced this 1.5 million homes that they want to build. It could really be part of that jigsaw if we went about it the right way. But it's got huge challenges to overcome still.
Okay. I mean, I think the only ones I've ever been involved with is where perhaps in some of these very tall tower blocks that we have down here, predominantly down here, perhaps the bathrooms have been bought as a modular unit, or perhaps even the kitchens, and they come fully fitted out, fully tiled with all the inlet points there, ready just to be craned in. But I think that has now spread to almost total modular construction, hasn't it? I mean, I see on the internet, particularly in China, they're selling sort of one-bedroom flats, containerized, that you can buy for about 30 grand, and
it's phenomenal.
And it arrives 6 weeks later, ready just to be plugged in.
It's phenomenal. What you can do with will and ingenuity. This in the UK, there is one big constituent part that's missing in modular construction that they have got in China, and that is state-backed initiatives. So if the government in China want to build 20 skyscrapers by this time next year, the only way they can do it is through modular, and they will go and make that happen, and it will be funded by the government, it will be driven by the government, and I think that's their regime, that's how they operate. But in the UK, there is no such mechanism.
No. Well, of course, during COVID, the Chinese built a lot of hospitals with modular construction, didn't they? And they were completing a hospital in weeks.
Yes, yeah.
We're still waiting for Boris Johnson's, aren't we?
I don't think we've completed any hospitals in the meantime, have we?
The 40 of them, yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it's difficult.
But you're right, it's government involvement. I mean, many years ago, I was involved in something which took me to Japan, and I was talking to the head of a very, very large conglomerate there now that had success worldwide. And I said, how have you done this in such a short space of time? And he said, my government gave me 25-year money at a fixed rate and told me to get on with it. Yeah. And so I never had to worry about cash flow. I never had to worry about exchange rates. I could function by predicting everything because I'd got the stability of solid money.
Yeah, and I think in the UK that solid money is coming from ultimately the end payer, which is usually the developer or indeed the homeowner who's asking to build themselves a lovely self-built home and using modular elements to do so. Yeah. And the challenge with that is, I was speaking to a number of funders about this challenge, is that if you're an investment house, if you're a brokering finance for a deal that is usually using modular construction, that creates a huge amount of work for them actually, because they not only have to send QSs down to check that actually what's being built is going to meet the regs and go and be passed and do all that sort of stuff. It's on time. it takes huge specialist engineers, etc. Specialist engineers within that process that don't normally find those specialisms in construction.
No.
So you need those individuals, and if you haven't got those individuals, then delays happen and costs go up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that leads us on really to the next point. Okay, so we're doing either a housing estate or a big block of flats or whatever. What are the potential savings in percentage terms by using modular construction? Because presumably you have a saving on labour, stored materials, and I suppose time. Yeah.
In theory, if you were able to solve all the challenges that are inherent in a production line to build, units, you could be looking at something between 30 and 50% savings on a modular build, on those elements of the build, the labour and the time, and that becomes quite significant. And then of course you also have, once you get past maybe hurdles like meeting regs, etc. You are saving also in terms of CO2 emissions. There are other savings to be made too, other than just financial.
Okay. Finbarr, we've talked before on various problems to do with this government target of 1.5 million homes. I get very irritated when the government say we're going to build. I really do want to know who we is. I'm not sure they know.
I don't think they've actually asked that question.
No. I think there's a lot of questions they haven't asked. But we've talked of two potential pitfalls here. One is the shortage of labour in the building industry, because we haven't been very good at running apprenticeships and building that side of the industry, have we?
No, we've gone on the other end of the scale and focused on getting people through universities, and we've also gone down a particular road after Brexit, which means that a lot of the skills have left the UK, and it's left us with a real void. And ironically, although we haven't got the environment necessarily required to make modular really work for us, it is part of the solution to solve the deficit in skills and of course the cost to build in the first place.
Yeah. Well, as far as the people are concerned, obviously we lost a lot of very good tradesmen with the post-Brexit visa restrictions.
Yeah.
And of course, as I've said, we've done very little to encourage people to go into that industry, have we? We haven't made
it attractive at all.
No. And no. I suppose the other pitfall on this 1.5 million is have we got enough materials readily available?
No, we don't.
And so modular construction is really answer to the prayers, isn't it?
It should be. It really should be, but I think it needs intervention in terms of, putting incentives in place to give surety. That 25-year money that you referred to earlier on with your contact in Japan. If there was surety in the system, I think people would be willing to take, some risks. At the moment, here's how house builders view it, I think. If you're going to build a new housing development, you've got planning, you've got approval, you're going to go. If you're going to go modular, that is a different set of regs. And if you get past that, then you've got to decide how you're going to spend the money, etc., etc. But modular is about volume. Most developers only build 1 or 2 units and then sell off plan. So you can't really do modular in how we sell units in the UK.
No.
And then there's this a resistance, I think, to change, and this is both in the industry and also in the general public. I think the industry, if you speak to architects, they think aesthetically modular is not a good place to be. If you speak to contractors and developers, they think, well, yeah, I could make it work, but the funding is the issue.
Yeah.
And I think among the general public, I think there's this idea that it's going to be inferior, or it might end up in an environment that's less attractive to live in.
Yeah.
And none of those things are necessarily true.
Well, I suppose that's the architect's resistance to it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, they're having a certain amount of their input taken away, aren't they?
Yeah, well, of course, yes.
That's the difficulty. And we've had conversations with the architects before, and I have this theory that says they make it more complicated than it needs to be, so that the fees go up. I mean,
I think you're being slightly sceptical there, but I'm sure there's something in there, Stephen.
I'm jolly well sure there is. But anyway, no. I mean, the concept is interesting. Now, from your point of view, just your personal point of view, before we go to the break, you're used to obviously dealing with building material suppliers. I presume you pre-book and pre-schedule deliveries and costs more than anything else. If you're going to be bringing into your portfolio modular units, how is that fitting in with what you do? Is it a totally new practice for you, or?
Well, it's not. I think it's a new expectation within the system rather than a new practice. But we view that, you know, whether it's a new innovative product that we're introducing into the market and helping our clients take advantage of, or whether it's modular construction in the sense of, you know, prefabricated toilets and bathrooms and kitchens. And I think it's about cost and choice. And usually the cost is an attractive element. The timing of that cost is where the resistance is that we get.
We'll come to that in part two. But I mean, when I've always said to you, you're in a very unique position because you're between the developer, the material supplier, you hear all these voices, so you're able to judge the market pretty well. So a developer comes to you and says, look, this is what I'm thinking of building. Let's presume it's a straightforward conventional build. Do you at any point say, hey, have you thought about modular construction here? Have you thought about integrating this?
We do. Our whole sort of approach to any project, whether it's a single unit or a multi-purpose unit or something in between, is one of the sort of phases we go through in the early stage is that sort of value engineering piece, and that comes under new product and the envelope and how you actually get to an envelope that's going to get sign off, and also modular. So we go through a whole gambit of options. It seems everything is attractive until it comes down to price.
Till paying for it. Okay, well, on that lovely note, we'll go to our break. So join me again after the break when I'll be getting Finbarr to dive a little bit deeper into the world of modular construction. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Matters. I'm joined by Finbarr Doyle, CEO of P4HB Procurement for Housebuilders. Welcome back, Finbarr. We've talked a little about the introduction of modular construction into our trade. Do you get a resistance from developers?
Yes. Yeah.
We're not quick on the uptake with these things, are we?
No, we're not. But construction in general, if I talk in broad brush strokes, construction's never really been at the coalface and sort of the most dynamic or innovative sort of industry to be in.
You just presume it to get done, don't you?
Well, yeah, you do, and we've always done it that way. What's wrong with that type approach? We're always trying to find ways that we can. I mean, our role in the chain we see is how can we help those stakeholders be the best at what they do best in the process, and how can we build at a lower cost? That there are sort of two big drivers in P4HB, and so we're always looking at ways that our clients, our developer clients, can reduce the cost to build, particularly around the material side of things. And so if there is, and there are savings, if you're talking about the difference between installing 20 bathrooms modular versus 20 bathrooms in a traditional sense, you can be talking anything between, as I said before, 20, 30, 40, 50% saving in
So
cost.
if you just take a bathroom, I mean, I suppose you've got what? You've got a plumber, you've got a sparks, you've got a tiler.
Yeah.
You've got what else?
Well,
flooring.
Yeah, but and then you've got to manage those trades in sync.
Yeah.
You've got to manage the materials in sync, and that's from multiple sources. Whereas the other option is literally a box of tricks that comes ready, fully assembled. And you just need and you don't need a sparky or a plumber or a floorer or anyone else. You just need someone who's trained to unpack a box and install it. That's essentially what it is.
So how would that work, for instance? So if I was a developer, I thought, okay, you've talked me into having some of the units constructed in a modular fashion. Would I send a couple of my fitters to the factory to get trained on how to fit those? How would it work physically?
Because of our supply chain relationships, we always look at the supply chain as both a source of materials, but also the source of technical and knowledge as well. So we would take a client back to essentially the factory floor, show them how those units are assembled in the factory, show them an example. We can organise training for them and make that happen too with the supply chain, and they would even come in certain instances, depending on what was being supplied. They supply chain technical people would come along to site and observe the first number of installations, make sure it was being done correctly, fix any snags and so on. So actually the steps that are needed to do it, we can solve.
Right.
The challenge is that they're not buying 20 packs of tiles whenever they need them. They're buying 20 bathrooms fully assembled and not leaving the factory till they're fully paid for.
Yes, exactly. Well, that was going to be my next point, really. That I suppose if I put it in the most simplest of terms, so at least I understand it. I know you're expert at this, but if you're a builder, constructor, developer, you're building a 50-story building, let's say, you pull your materials in as and when. What's it called?
Just in time.
Just in time.
And we operate on a just in time basis anyway, and that's what
Same
we help
the car
them do.
industry does at its best. Yeah. Okay. So you are sort of just in time theory, and there's a spin-off from that is that you only have to pay just in time.
Correct. You only pay for what you've taken.
But as you've just alluded to, with these units, you're going to have to tell a factory that you want 50, 100, 200 of these units. I mean, I don't know what the lead time is into ordering stuff. I don't know what that is.
But that can be fun too.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a bit like wanting a new 3-piece suite, isn't it? You get
26 weeks.
You get all infused, and you go in and say it's going to take 3 months to come from Italy.
Yeah.
But no. So obviously there's a cash flow implication here. The factory is not going to produce those units until it's got a good chunk of the money, and it's certainly not going to release them to your building site until it's paid in full.
Correct.
Is that
and that's ultimately what it comes down to. And so, and I think it depends. If you're in tier 1 and you see that is, if your cash flow reserves are such that you can make certain decisions on a macro level and be able to access the supply chain in that way, then good for you. Very few developers think like that.
No.
And if you're sort of in tier 2 or an independent SME developer, you're just not going to tie your cash up, even if it's a 20% saving. And your investor needs, there's other risks involved. And unfortunately, the current regime, because of regulation and so on, is that if your investor who's funding the project says, okay, let's do this, they've got additional costs they're going to levy on that developer because they want QSs down there making sure everything's to spec.
Everything's what it should be.
Everything is what it should be. Everything's on time. And so now you have additional costs layering in that you might have thought you're going to save 30, 40, 50%, but now you've actually paid out for other things that you never had to pay straightforward.
And also, I presume that if there is a mistake on the specification, perhaps an inlet in the wrong place or a wiring loom in the wrong place or something, something like that. I mean, it might be 300 or 400 of these wretched units, and
it's rare that happens. But the reason why it's rare that happens is, the engineers and the designers are, they don't let stuff like that happen. Although it can happen. No. Where it goes wrong is if you don't have access to those skills, you could be set in a queue waiting for someone to make sure that things like that don't happen. Yeah. In the design phase.
So just overall, Finbarr, are you in favour of this move to modular?
I think it's the only way that we have any chance of moving the needle on 190,000 units built each year, which is currently the level that we're at. Unfortunately, right now, if you added up if you take modular in the biggest sense of building whole units, right now the capacity in the UK in 2025 is forecast to be only 20,000 units.
Oh dear.
So you add up all the players together and you're still not scratching the surface.
No. Just on this point of volume and ease of hitting the numbers, but staying on the subject of modular, I mentioned earlier in the programme that I've seen on the internet and on TV, in actual fact, these totally equipped modular units. And when I say totally equipped, I mean furnished, showers, electric looms all in place, TVs on the wall, all right. In China, freight on board price of about 30 grand for the equivalent of a sort of 300 to 400 square foot one bedroom apartment. I don't know why somebody doesn't buy 100 of them, place them in a field, allocate a sort of garden area to each one, sell them for 60 grand, making 100% profit, but nevertheless providing perhaps 100 new homes that I know many young people that would give their arms to buy a one bedroom flat for £60,000 these days. Look round here, a one bedroom flat is £800,000 now. Yeah. £800,000.
It's crazy.
And I'm quite sure if I looked hard enough, I could find some plots, even around the East End of London here or Docklands, that you could put, 50 or 100 of these homes on and divide the land up a little bit. Why doesn't it happen? Why are we not innovative enough?
The long and short is first of all, the units that would come from China would not meet UK regs.
Why?
Because the UK regs would say so.
But in what respect?
In terms of their insulation performance, their eco credentials, how they were manufactured, all of the, in terms of, do they meet the insulation requirements in this country that are now deemed to be required? Do they meet the environmental requirements in terms of the new legislation coming in 2025 and creating those spaces and offsetting your biodiversity net gains, etc. The second thing is I don't think the government would like it. And I think there's probably an import restriction there.
Well,
and I think actually, if you could cut through that red tape, that would be a really quick silver bullet to at least 100,000 units a year.
Well, I mean, I think I said to you before when we were on a programme, I had a friend wrote to me and he said, one thing we need to be careful of, we do need to get a move on, get building and really think how we speed this up. But conversely, we don't want to start building things like we did just straight after the World War II.
Correct, yeah.
And sort of have streets full of prefabs and substandard building really, and estates that turned within years into ghettos, and we did.
We did, and I think this idea of, I mentioned at the start of the program, if there was some state intervention or in China they've got the state backing to go and create this funding, etc., etc. The irony is that if you had a mechanism in place in the UK that gave that surety, and they just went go and build, that's what you might end up with is environments that people really ought not to be living in.
Yeah. Well, Finbarr, thank you very much for coming in today and talking us through the modular construction minefield, shall we say. I think we've touched on all the important points there, and it's obviously going to be a critical part of our our future. So again, Finbarr, thank you very much indeed for coming in. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters.